Today I'd like to talk about the reservation and attempted assimilation era a little bit, and then get into an era that I've studied a lot, and that's the allotment era, and get in a little bit about that. So try to cover one or two today. Now, before the first exam, we're going to wind up defining Indian country, which may seem kind of bizarre. We should have done it the first day, but it's not so easy. So there was actually a congressional declaration or definition of Indian country put forth in 1948. So we'll have a look at that and look and see what all that means. So we're going to try to have a finale with defining Indian country before we have an exam on 2 weeks from today. By the way, I'll probably today put up the sign-up sheet for the times for you to reserve a time on Thursday of next week. So I'll try to have a number of different times. You don't have to take it during this class if you don't want to. You can take it maybe earlier and then maybe a little bit later. It doesn't matter to me. I just need to know when you're planning to be there. Well, we've talked about the reservation era, and recall that the reservation itself, the idea of a reservation. Reservations, what are reservations intended to do here? The reservation program, or the reservation era, was one in which, well, the reservations were lands reserved, held back, really is a better term. Really held back and segregated from non-Indian settlement. This term reserve in the 19th century, especially in the second half of the 19th century, the term reserve would mean a lot of things. In terms of federal land and the federal government, it meant land that was no longer going to be part of the public domain. So, for example, in the what was the first national park? Yellowstone. Yeah, Yellowstone. And then remember that after, in the 1880s and the 1890s, the Congress and really the president, beginning mostly in the 1890s, started taking land out of the public domain because it was somehow special, kind of like Yellowstone National Park. But they didn't always declare them national parks. In fact, Yellowstone was really early, and then later the national parks would come in quite a bit later when Roosevelt was in office, Teddy Roosevelt. But they started reserving forest lands. Remember that? So when the forestry division was created, the federal government started reserving forest lands. And so they used the same term, reserve, a forest reserve. What we have today as our national forests and national grasslands were originally referred to as forest reserves. They were intended to be resource reserves, essentially, kind of like the National Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It's intended to be a national base for natural resources. That's kind of the same thing here. The government in the Indian reservation program is not giving land to the tribe. It's reserving federal land for the exclusive use of the tribe. It's reserving it. It's dictating who gets to use it. Okay. So in a forest reserve, forest reserve was the forest reserves were created in order to prevent the complete wiping out of forests. But that didn't mean that the forests couldn't be logged or couldn't be utilized for grazing. So that's a different story. The idea was that they would be held by the federal government and it would be federal property. They would not be handed over to private hands and wasted, or at least they wouldn't be the resource wouldn't be lost all of a sudden. That was the idea. In the case of Indian reservations, the federal government still has this land, but it's giving this exclusive use. It's recognizing the rights of native peoples to utilize the land, and it's giving them the exclusive utilization of that land. So it's designating a specific group of people to have a right to use the land. It's not giving the title to the land like they did with the 5 tribes, which we'll get into hopefully today. So reservations are still federal lands, but they are held in trust. Remember that one? So the federal trust is really key. Let's go to that term trust, and you can look up trust law if you like, but when someone establishes a trust, there's a beneficiary and there's a trustee, right? Well, say you're the beneficiary and you're not of age to take the $10 million cash that somebody has left you. All right, you got to wait until you're 33 or something like that before you can even touch that principal, that balance of $10 million. And in the meantime, there is a trustee that's been assigned to look after your well-being, and they have control over that $10 million, with the trust being given over to that person by the, what would they call it? I can't remember the term. The trustor, is that it?
Trustee.
The trustee is the person who is trusted to watch it. The person who designates the trustee and gives the $10 million is a term I can't think of at the moment, and I've always had trouble trying to remember that particular term. Anyway, doesn't matter. So the idea is that who owns it? That's the question. In the case of that $10 million, who owns it legally? The trustee does, all right? But the trustee is obligated to care for it and watch over it for the beneficiary. Okay? Yeah.
How though? Like, the person was only trusted to that.
You're entrusted to it.
But doesn't the beneficiary, aren't they supposed to get
it? The beneficiary has the beneficiary is going to receive it when the beneficiary reaches a certain age. Okay? But in the meantime, the beneficiary does not control it at all. That's the point. Okay, so the Indian reservation is owned by the federal government in trust for the Indian tribe who is not of age yet because they're wards. They're in pupillage, remember that? So they're not to be trusted yet. When will they be of age? When will they be trusted? It's a good question. But this whole idea of federal trust land is one that, okay, the federal government has a moral obligation to protect it and to allow native peoples to utilize it as if they were going to become of age someday and be able to take over. But that's not going to happen, all right? So it's like a perpetual trust. And the federal government then has this obligation. The federal government is has inherited that obligation, at least philosophically. It's inherited that obligation from who? From the British Crown. Right? So the United States federal government has basically taken over the same relationship that the British Crown supposedly had with Native peoples. That the British Crown recognized their right of occupancy, the right to be there, the right to use the resources of the land. That's a really important one. They have the exclusive right to use the resources, to the resources. But the federal government also has this trust to allow them to keep it, to use it, and to protect them from encroachment from other people, from other parties. So it's an odd relationship. And then if you say, well, okay, the Cherokee Nation, or when you drive into Window Rock, Arizona, you see entering Navajo Nation, right? The sign that says that. But that's a twist on the term. Nation in the United States, a lot of people think of nation as, independent countries, independent states. But technically, no. Nations are people. And by calling the Navajo Nation, giving it a sort of territorial recognition, that's good PR, but it's not quite right. All right, so the federal trust relationship on the reservation. So now this means that what matters is that reservations are Indian country. We'll see that later. Okay? Always Indian country. So the question is, there are other things that can be referred to as sort of informal reservations. You've got the formal version and you've got informal versions. And allotment is one of those processes that created a very complicated caveat to this idea of Indian country. So the reservation period, now as you know, the reservation is reserved, generally it's reserved from some of the land that was originally held in Aboriginal title, original Indian title. So you can have some reservation land like the Navajo Reservation, which is part of their original holding. But then you can have other land, like let's say the Ponca tribe up here in north central Oklahoma, or the Otoe, Missouri tribe. Let's say the Ponca tribe. The Ponca have a reservation, or they had a reservation, and they arrived at that location after leaving another reservation in Nebraska. And they were, for the most part, picking up the pieces from getting beat up by the Lakota. But they came to Indian Territory, and in the 1870s with the idea that they would have a new reservation, another place, a place to relocate for everybody to relocate. So they arrived here, and so that reservation was actually purchased for them by the federal government, okay, from who? Where did the federal government get the land? Did they just already have it? The federal government had actually purchased it from the Cherokee Nation. Okay? Well, they didn't. Did they purchase it? Yeah, I'm not sure exactly which. It was. Yeah, it was part of the outlet. They got the Cherokee Nation had claim to it. The federal government, I think, cleared the title on that, and then they assigned it to new tribes. Okay. Now, even before the Cherokees had it, it was claimed by another tribe, and the federal government gained a cession from that tribe. So the Aboriginal title was long gone. See what I'm saying? Aboriginal title was extinguished a long time ago, before the Cherokees even had it. The Cherokees couldn't have claimed it had the Aboriginal title not even been extinguished. So essentially what the federal government is doing is just designating land as reservation land, which brings it down a notch from that land swap for the 5 tribes that took place through treaty. You know, basically this land is now transferred to over here. We're going to move you out of the way. This land is now the same as that land. Not so with the reservation peoples like the Ponca.